anytime you want something, you can't chase it. You have to let it chase you. Be the prize.
Be the
She's
prize.
Be the prize. Let me think about that for a second there, Mark.
Be the prize.
The Big Sell Illuminati, where some of the best in the business discuss what's worked, what's working, and what's failed in selling big sales. Our panel of experts includes Clarity Seeker, a black belt of brands, our snarky marketer, Monique de Maio. CEO to CEO selling is his game. Fortune 500 in his lane. The Lex Luthor of the close, Mark Kennedy. The effective executive, a force on the boards, a buyer on fire, Tiffany Olson. David versus Goliath selling, the prince of process, Sun Tzu of big sales strategy, Tom Searcy. And that's your panel. Now it's time to talk about big sales.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the podcast, Big Sale Illuminati. We are glad to have the entire team here, high performance team, that is going to be working through that exact issue today. How do you build? How do you manage? How do you run a high performance team? That as we move towards bigger and bigger sales out there in the marketplace, you can't close big alone. You have to have a team to do that, and you have to have a high performance team to do that. And I've asked Mark to kind of help us out with really working with that. He's had a couple companies, built them and sold them and crashed and burned them, and he's done all that. So he is the expert of winning and losing with high performance teams. So Mark, help us step into this idea of the high performance team.
Thank you, Tom. So today we are absolutely publishing gold. So everybody who's listening to this podcast, you need to Venmo $10,000 to @Mark-Kennedy.6 because this today is gold. And I want to empathize with everybody who's listening. So if for the three people who are listening in Southern North Dakota, here's what I want you to think about. This is the hardest thing there is in business. It's easier to create a winning software program than it is to create a high-performing sales team. For me personally, this is the hardest thing. And it's hard because the degree to which you have to integrate so many different skill types and so many different personalities is really, really, really difficult. And somebody that once worked with me helped me understand that a sales process is all about your people and your information, and then their people, meaning your prospect, and their information. And the stage gate steps you need to go through to actually win. And it's such a difficult thing when you're a relatively small company selling to relatively gigantic companies. And I think anybody who's going to listen to this podcast is probably one of those people because it's a tough thing. So small companies are always trying to sell big deals to big companies. So therefore, putting together a high-performing team is incredibly important. So what I would say for this group to get started, to start the discussion, and I'll kick it to Tiffany first for the buyer on fire. So what do you think are the most important outputs? So we're going to start with what a team needs to produce, right? If you're a football team, my favorite football team is the Pittsburgh Steelers. And every year, the Pittsburgh Steelers do a really important thing. They do the same thing every year for the last 50 years. They write a mission statement, and they say, the purpose of the Pittsburgh Steelers football team is to win the Super Bowl. And we're going to do that by having owners own, coaches coach, managers manage, and players play. I know it sounds ridiculously simple, but getting the outputs right and getting the roles right is incredibly important. And it's the same thing for a high-performing sales team. So Tiffany, what do you think what are the most important, not the least important, but the most important outputs of a high-performing sales team? And before I begin this, I think it depends is probably the more important part of the first part because sales teams are different depending on what the overall objective is. But what do you think are the most important outputs? I'll even take the first and easiest one off the board, which is obviously achieving your revenue goal. But what are the most important outputs of a high-performing sales team?
So first of all, let me say, Mark, I'm sorry that you're a Steelers fan, and I believe that Taylor Swift actually wrote a song about their mission statement, didn't she? Players want to play, play, play.
Yes, that's exactly right.
I don't know who came first, the mission statement or Taylor Swift, but
Or I can promise you it was the 6-time Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers.
is that all? How many years have they been playing?
Are you a Colts fan? Don't even make me go there.
Vikings, baby. Vikings.
This story gets worse.
All right. So I will say for me, there is no debate on what the measurements are because it is revenue and or profit. So profit is gold if you can measure profit. It is very difficult to do, especially if you have just a large organization. And if you can't give your salespeople all of that information for just internal reasons or whatever it may be, profit is the best measurement I think that you can ever measure by. But a good proxy for that is revenue if it is in the right place. And by that I mean, is it in the category that you need? Is it in your new customers or did you want it in existing?
So you're talking market share.
No, because you can have a lot of share and not a lot of revenue because you got that revenue or you got that share by just having a low price. So it's got to be on that key measurement. And I really think that you got to keep it simple and you got to align the team around a goal and metrics. Who's ever on that team? So that's my answer. I'd love to hear from Monique on kind of your thoughts on that, especially coming from the marketing side.
Put yourself as the CMO. What do you want back from your sales team?
Converted leads. If I'm feeding you, freaking close these mothers.
No, I know what it is. It's just take these layup sales leads I'm giving you and just finish. Just please, just don't mess them up.
Exactly. Just effing convert this shit. Would you please just land the plane? And so if you do a high quality lead generation program and you have metrics and you have data on what's being opened, what's being downloaded, what's being looked at, and you're the king of this, like I don't have to tell you. So the other thing I was going to, well, we can get to this later, but it's also the idea of how the teams work together with this sort of everybody's in different locations and a lot of people are working remotely and so on. I don't think there's that esprit de corps that like the gravitas of the sales force coming together and having the powwows and the internal competition that happens around the water cooler, as they used to say, is not really as prevalent. It's people can hide and people will they're afraid to get on the phone a lot of the time. A newer series of salespeople. So it's this idea that you can't reach the client. They don't want to pick up the phone and call a human. They don't want to interact with a human. So how do you land the plane today is harder, I think, in a lot of ways than it was in previous years.
I would throw in on what Monique is saying is that it comes in, a qualified lead comes in, and if you got a high performance team, you're going to wind up with a scrum of some nature, an organized methodology that you're going to go after. I think one of the things about high performance sales teams, there isn't a universal established layer of quality. You have some players who do a better job than others, and that's an ongoing deal of what you've got. And it's very frustrating. What you typically have in a high performance team is you have more utility players who pick up what's necessary to move things forward. Leadership comes in and either coaches, transfers, or terminates the people who are not making the contribution. But a high performance team winds up with a number of people that they trust inside of the team. And then there's other people that they say you're either a specific player or you can't play. And that's, we talk about this idea of the high performance team. It's an ideal that's an asymptotic curve that we are forever trying to get close to, but it's very, very hard to meet and sustain.
I think the other thing that's happening is people are hiring people that have sales experience. And sometimes that square peg doesn't go into the round hole. So in the sense that just because you sold Oracle doesn't mean that you can sell this startup SaaS program. Okay. Maybe some things don't convert because you're being plopped into a different culture. And the thing that I want to address with building a high performance team is that salespeople are not, in some cases, people say, oh, salespeople are a commodity. Yeah, they are, but they're not. They're humans, and they need to be the aspect of their personalities and how you match other people with other people will create or not create that high performance team. So if you put a whole bunch of people that have adverse personalities, they're not going to work together well. Or if you have a sales manager and a salespeople that kind of conflict with one another, it's not going to play. It's just not. So you have to really test for culture. In my opinion, you shouldn't hire anyone that's selling without doing some level of a personality assessment.
Let's talk about culture. Lots of definition around culture. People put up those 5 value set bullshit in their lobby, and here's what our honor package is. And I hate those things, because if you ask any 5 employees, please go ahead and say these verbatim, no one knows. All right. You know why? Because it's not a high utility part of that. I will say that on the personality piece, one of the pieces of integrity, and I talk about integrity, is just doing what you commit to do. And so what happens is that you get groups that like each other or work together or have communication or whatever. But in the end, trust starts to fall apart and other people backfill because they want to get, yes, Monique, they want to land the frickin' deal.
That's right. In the absence of leadership, people make shit up.
I think in the absence of success, people make shit up. I think when you talk about trust, winning for salespeople goes a long way towards building a high-performing team. And that becomes the catch-22, which is, without a team, how do you win? And if you can't win, you don't have a team.
Well, culture is the shared history of what works. So people wind up saying, we got this, and we're all going to be a part of getting this going forward. High-performance teams figure out what works, and they repeat it.
So let's talk about the models for high-performance teams, because I think this is important. I've seen 2 distinct models work, and it to a degree it depends on the where a business is in its given life cycle. But I call the 2 different models of building a sales team the ER doctor model, where there's a resident genius that's at the middle of the model, and everything else around that person is there to support that person's success. That's the ER model, the ER physician model. And then the second model is, I call it the football team model, which is you have a bunch of very highly tuned, very specific operating resources that operate interdependently, that the value is distributed. So the ER model, everybody knows who gets paid in that one. And then on the football team model, there's a secondary model, which is everybody participates, everybody plays, everybody gets paid. What do you guys think about the business model idea behind a high-performing sales team?
So I think that any model can work as long, and you might have that same model or the different models in the same company, just based on certain personalities. However, I think that the key is the communication and the alignment, and that people understand the roles and that they're accountable and the team holds them accountable. That's what makes a good team. Because when I think of teams that either were successful or failed, it all goes around these roles and accountability. And just everybody understands. If people don't understand what either their role is or what they need to do, you get people stepping over each other, or nobody understands what the customer needs, and then they're on the road to nowhere.
So as the buyer on fire, what's an example or 2 that you've seen where people hit it on the head, or organizations hit it on the head selling to you, versus the team itself was weirdly mismatched from what you sold to? Do you have any examples of that?
Yeah, I do. So one particular company that we worked with, it was a new company, came in, and the CEO and I talked. He described the whole kind of big picture that they wanted to do. And they had a product that was coming out of the market and said, hey, can we come in and talk to your technical people? One, he knew I wasn't technical, and neither was he. So then he sent me a lovely follow-up email that I could send on to my team saying these folks are going to contact you. So right there, you've got he did a very nice job of contacting me, setting it up so that it was a priority for my folks. They met technical to technical because that's where the sale was either going to happen or not happen. And then they brought in the support people. So then they brought in the pricing, the customer service aspect, the project manager of it, and everybody, the communication was constant and everybody knew their role. So it kind of gets back to that.
I think that there's an interesting part about the story you just told, and that is high performance teams, they do not walk away from leadership. Leadership still has to sit in as a part of that high performance team. It's interesting the number of times I've seen where leadership has the kind of conversation that you're talking about and then moves it along, delegates it out to the team, and then steps away, believing the high performance team then will take it all the way forward. Leadership, doesn't have to be in every meeting or every section, but leadership has to be involved regularly and positionally, because otherwise the group will, with their best intentions, go in the wrong direction because leadership to leadership, that peer-to-peer that established the relationship, you can't lose it on their side. You can't lose it on your own side.
So who's on the high-performing sales team? That's a great segue, because this matters. And you could do an entire podcast. You could do an entire book on how to bring in subject matter experts into a sales process. People who are not native to selling, they're critical to the sales process. So who's on that team? What does that team look like?
Well, one, you've got to have a good leader. It can be your head of sales. It can be the CEO. It can be, it can be the actual salesperson themselves. But it's just got to be that good leader who can.
So the head of the tribe. Who else has to be on that team?
Well, in this case, I think mostly you've got to have technical people. You've got to have the people that then actually make the sale work. So your customer service or your service or whatever that is in that particular business.
Well, I think if I may distinguish it for a second, if you're talking about an enterprise direct selling model, then you have to have the account executive, you have to have the systems engineer, you have to have the systems analyst, and you then the person who knows how to close. So the farmer and the hunter both have to align, and then you have the systems engineer and all that. The only challenge that happens, I think, when we're talking about different models is if you have a channel model and a direct model going at the same time, then that becomes really effing hard.
I would offer this as a general statement about this. It's when you get to high performance sales team on very big sales, it does break in. It does fall into everything that's been said. It's basically a peer-to-peer subject matter expert alignment. Your performance team has to match it. And so if you were to say who needs to be there, the first question you need to ask is who's in the other room?
That's right.
That's
actually why I think, when you talk about the models themselves, everybody, like every small business is founder-led, and you're going to have a founder-led sales model for the most part. Unless you've got some kind of weird technical genius involved with a great product, you're going to have founder-led sales, which is the ER model. And I've seen that, and I've tried to migrate out of it. I've done it myself. I continue to do it to this day. But the football model, which is what Tom's talking about, where you can't have anybody unblocked, it's basically the idea, right? So if you're playing offense against their defense, you need to make sure that somebody's in the room that's going to match up to what they've got. And I think that's absolutely crucial. And I think most companies, like when I was young and I first started my company in the one I sold to Publicis in 2014. I started that business in the fall of 2000. And I was in a room with Deutsche Bank, Global Investment Banking, and their IT department. And we had a company that sold basically publishing solutions. So at the time, in 2000 was it was on the back end of the .com thing. And all these companies were still going public, and they were with the SEC regulations, they had to put these pitch books together where they would they basically would pitch the business to the investors that would take them to the public markets. And there were a lot of regulations around when that content had to be released, and had to be released at the exact same time in New York markets as it was released in Singapore and Frankfurt and Tokyo, all around the world. And at the time, like today, that's easy. Then it wasn't easy because the internet was just kind of flopping around. And I was in this meeting with Deutsche Bank, and it was me and my tech weenie. And there were literally 15 people. This is the wrong way to do it. 15 people around the table. And I needed this deal. I'm talking about needing this deal. Thank you, Nick. And there was a guy there, and this is tech, right? And I'm slightly technical, but not that technical. And there was a guy there, and he's like, I'm in charge of servers that have green flashing lights. And then there's another guy with a propeller on his head. I'm in charge of servers with orange lights, and I'm in charge of servers with yellow lights. And I'm like going, oh my God, just shoot me. How did I get here? Like all of the bad choices in my life that led me to here. And I'm sitting with these people. But what I learned at that point was you need people that line up with them. And that's the whole point of this story, which I can go on about forever. But I'm sitting there going, it's me and Tech Weenie, and we're just bang, 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 bang. It was like being caught in a crossfire from machine gun fire. But we got the deal.
When you say lining up with the people that are in the room, Tom, you said know who's going to be in the room. That's exactly it. You've got to have that team, and then you've got to make sure everybody knows their role of who they're going to talk to and why they're going to talk to them and what's important to that person, because that's what really gets it done. And you were lucky with your Tech Weenie person, Mark, because you guys were still able to do that. You were able to play those roles and beat all of those challenges.
It's funny how I do think this. So for a high performing sales team, if you said like, I've always taken for granted the role of the closer would be there. Because for me, the most important role was if you have the smartest, I think, Monique, I think you said, if you have the smartest systems engineer in the room, you usually win. And if we can show them something they don't know, and we can show them the folly of their ways, that usually that's where you engender the trust. I mean, selling is all, I mean, I don't know if this is the basis of sales. And I teach this all the time with my people in my company. Like what you're doing in the sales process, all you're doing is building trust. You're like, well, we're trustworthy. I'm like, you're not trustworthy when you walk in the door. You have to build trust and earn trust. And I think I think having that kind of capability and that kind of depth of credibility is what really works.
Which is why a founder-led sales process works, because you inherently walk in with that context with your content. You know what I'm saying? It's like you know the business almost as well as the client that you're sitting across from. And if you do that, then you immediately engender trust, because now they're peer to peer, and now they're engaged in what you have to say, because you have contextual information about their competitors, you have contextual information about their industry, you have contextual information that's valuable to them, that's accretive. Or you hate that word, so it incremental to what they had before. So when you add value, you close.
So I would say this much. I don't know how many people, I've been ambushed so many times. USAA Group, City Corp, largest transportation company. I mean, it doesn't matter what the industry is. I walk in with a team of 2 or 3. I believe that I'm going to be talking to 2 or 3 people. 30 people show up. 20 people show up. And so getting the inside information, because you get ambushed.
Yeah, but wait. So back up the truck here for a second. You can't get ambushed if you haven't asked the questions. Your high performance team should freaking know before they walk in the door that there's going to be 30 people there.
I'm sorry. Were you in the USAA Group meeting? Were you in the Allstate meeting group? Were you in the? Shut the up. So listen. Here's the gist of it. You can get ambushed. One of the ways to not get ambushed is don't bring donuts, because everybody shows up for the donuts. So you wind up with 30 account managers. But the thing about it is that what happens if you're offering value that spreads across a large number of people, it's not terrible to have a lot of people in the same position, because they now are all vested if you've got a good session. The issue is, did you bring enough positional players in there? Did you, if there's 30 account managers, did you have somebody who could speak to the account manager? If it's green light, red line technology, did you bring the right person for that? It's sometimes what happens is they say it's going to be this person that's in there. That's on Monday. Tuesday, 30 people show up. Why? Because of the, God forbid, carbon copy. We're having a meeting with these. Please send me your questions. And then everybody shows up. And so it does happen that you get ambushed. Not all the time, but more often than you'd like. And part of the reason is everybody wants to be in on the game. Because if they're not in the room, they don't get to be a part of the discussion.
So let's get back to the kind of the focusing idea here is, what are the most important barriers? What are the most important blockers to building a high performance sales team?
I really do think it has to be trust, culture, and then skill set in that order, right? And you can't hire for trust. You have to hire for both skill and fit. So for me, you can't expect a cat to act like a dog and a dog to act like a cat, as they say in French. You just have to hire the utility players that you need so that when you get those warm leads that those great marketing people have just landed in your inbox.
It's a layup.
Do you guys not agree with that?
No, it's impossible to disagree with it. I think the issue is understanding it would be very, very challenging to hire, develop trust, which takes time, right? And sustain a high performance team. I think part of the high performance team is and this falls to leadership, right? On that is the ability to find utility players, work with the individuals who are breaking trust because they're not fulfilling all of the deals. I'll tell you, one of the biggest issues on people not mentally showing up is that they're the IT guy is pre-qualified. This isn't going to be a real deal. So leadership has to really bring people together and say, no, this is a place to invest time, energy, attention, and to follow the process to get the deal done.
Do you think it's harder now? I think, not to sound like an old guy, but back in the day, you had there's no democracy in sales. I think sales is, I always tell people, listen, if you want a democracy, go do something else. This is a pseudo, and I mean very pseudo benevolent dictatorship is what great sales are. Pseudo benevolent dictatorships. And so when I tell you to jump, I'm going to tell you exactly when to jump and how high your ass is going to jump. And you're going to jump then. And by the way, that game that I play, it doesn't play all the time because the way culture has changed, people they just don't receive that well until they win. But once they start to win, they're like, oh, I get it. We can play that way. So my Bill Belichick style, and I hate Bill Belichick because I hate the effing Patriots, but I admire what he does. He's like, there's a line and you're going to play on that line. What do you guys think about that? Does that work? Does that change in the last couple of years?
I think it does. The thing that I have seen, two of my enterprise clients are going through this. There's not an alignment between leadership and the sales and marketing functions. So what is happening is leadership has this expectation, top line, bottom line revenues, and they're just looking at sales and like, you guys didn't deliver, marketing sucks, you're not giving them the leads. But sales is now doing their own thing. So they're literally DQing leads just because they don't think they look like leads, right? So they're disqualifying stuff that's legit. And so the marketing people are held accountable for the leads that are not being converted because the salespeople are now figuring out how to use their systems, their software systems, to disqualify or move stuff out of pipeline arbitrarily. So what are you doing? So somewhere along the line, all the leadership, sales, and marketing need to be in the same room and say, what is the integrity of our data? And how are we going to line up behavior to our expectations? Because your direct salespeople inside are doing this. Your outside direct salespeople are doing that. And then marketing is saying, what the F? Because I just handed you X number of leads and none of them are converting because you're not addressing them in the same manner.
I want to jump in and simply say on big sales, all right, rather than, So when we look at big sales, those leads should be coming to leadership, and then leadership to the pseudo democracy,
benevolent dictatorship.
Benevolent dictatorship. When it comes to the benevolent dictatorship, that's the place where everything you just said, Monique, has to come together. It's like saying this week we play the Colts, next week we play the Patriots. And we have to change some of the playbook up to make certain that we've got the right people in the right place doing the right things. And that's leadership's job to execute that. And leadership too often leaves too early because they love this word called delegate.
But I will say that I think that the team that you described, I think the sustainability of that, it's all based around one person and their kind of minions. But if that one person leaves, the whole thing crashes down because people haven't been able to either think on their own or be developed or that type of thing. So I think there's that difference between leadership and dictatorship.
I hear you. So I was on one of the best performing sales teams I ever had was we changed our model at where I run now, but we had this thing we called Sales Team 6, like SEAL Team 6, and it was basically some sales operations and analyst people that were the behind the scenes folks, and then we had 2 or 3 on the field closers and me, and that team was. I think if you went and talked to those people and said, what was that experience like? They would say, I got 5 years of experience in a year. They went fast. And I think that's good. I mean, I think mentorship is real in sales. I mean, I joke about dictatorships and stuff like that. And I mean, I'll joke about it until I don't have to joke about it, until I have to drop the hammer. But I mean, I think that's how people learn. Like, if you really want to be great at what you do, you want to immerse yourself around people that are really great at it. And I don't know. I think that reps matter.
Well, so we got to land, as Monique says, we got to land this plane. I would say that we can come back to this again. I would also say I want to talk about at some point how people learn, because as we bring people on in this peer-to-peer environment, we got to get them accelerated and up to speed on their roles and the language that's there and what how that goes. And I see that as a future episode. But for this conversation, great conversation. Thanks everybody for being here. And between now and the next time we talk, good luck to everybody on their next biggest sale.
Thanks for listening to the Big Sale Illuminati podcast. If you like this episode, give us a thumbs up and let us know in the comments. Also, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're listening on. Until our next episode, best wishes on your big sales.